For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, wrote Koheleth, better known to us by his Latin name Ecclesiastes, who then provided a laundry list of alternatives, each of which had a time of relevance in our lives, whether as individuals, as communities, or as whole societies. The list begins with the bigger facts of life, birth and death, and then proceeds through planting and harvest, which were natural enough for an agricultural society, killing and healing, construction and destruction, varieties of sadness and joy, connection and separation, manufacture and disassembly, or perhaps recycling, silence and speaking, affection and conflict, and the inescapable reality of war against the enduring, if elusive, dream of peace. I've intentionally refrained from adhering too rigidly to Ecclesiastes' own words, going even further than Pete Seeger's paraphrasing in his popular song, Turn, 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 which is probably the only reason most of you know this passage from the Bible in the first place. I do so in order to emphasize that the passage should be interpreted broadly rather than literally, which is to say that Ecclesiastes is using everyday activities to point us towards deeper meanings. The great themes of life and meaning are found in the common, often mundane things that consume our time and attention. And there is a time, or there has been a time, or there will be a time to come when they will be an overriding concern in our lives, each and every one of them. This morning, I'd like to focus on two couplets in Ecclesiastes' list: a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, along with a time to keep and a time to throw away, which, like one or two other sets of alternatives, reflect two ways of saying pretty much the same thing. There is a time for holding on and a time for letting go. And sometimes the letting go of what has been hurtful or harmful, unfruitful or simply useless, is a prerequisite for holding on to what is satisfying, helpful, and good. And while we may think that holding on takes more energy, more effort, more intentionality than letting go, it has been my experience that just the opposite is true. It's harder to let go than it is to hold on. If you don't believe me, a visit to my home study would prove the point. Although it would be less embarrassing for me to let you tour my basement or garage instead. That's how bad it is. What I refer to as clutter is what my daughters say is evidence I could be featured on the television series Hoarders. Although in my defense, I can see across the room without standing up. But I'm not proud. It's easy enough to see physical clutter for what it is and judge those of us who can't seem to let things go, whether it be old furniture, retired appliances and equipment, unnecessary documents, which I like to refer to as archives, outgrown clothing, trinkets from past journeys, and keepsakes that give us something tangible to hold on to from people we've known and loved or loathed, and experiences we've had. I used to save my boarding passes until it occurred to me that I was never going to board those planes and trains again. And so I shredded them. But what about spiritual clutter? The spiritual clutter, the emotional baggage, hurtful memories, and old wounds that we like to cling to, often nurturing them so they actually grow in intensity, like weeds in a garden or algae on the surface of a lake. Whole libraries have been written on decluttering our emotional lives. But many, if not most of us, continue to carry around the metaphorical trunks of unwelcome memories. Although, just as you can see at the airport, some of us pack more lightly than others. The turning of the year, a natural and recurring cycle of nature for those of us living on the third stone from the sun, offers an annual opportunity for individuals and groups to reflect upon the past year and anticipate the year to come. Each rotation around the sun actually carries many such opportunities to set the year, to reset the year, depending on where we live, what we do for a living, and the traditions we follow. The modern Western calendar sets January 1st as the first day of the new year, although, like Celsius and Fahrenheit, we have competing calendars to measure by. Other societies and religious communities follow different calendars. After all, the very idea of a calendar is a human construct, not something ordained in heaven. For those who follow more natural rhythms, the winter solstice might be seen as the beginning of a new year, or perhaps the summer solstice, or one of the equinoxes in between, depending on whether you're a shady person or a sunny person, a cold person or a warm person, not to mention which hemisphere you live in. For those of us whose lives are dominated by the academy, it may be the academic calendar that establishes when a new year begins, while those with robust self-esteem might mark their own birthdays as the beginning of a new year. Although I could conceive of doing so 9 months earlier. But not even a groan here, people. I could conceive of doing it 9 months earlier. My essential point is that we celebrate many New Year's days during the course of a single year because our lives are complex, even if they're not especially complicated. For the better part of 2 decades, I hosted a gathering on New Year's Eve known as Gamlerskvöld, literally the old year's evening, in which family and friends gathered to mark the turning of the year. Some of the people here even attended some years. Also known as burning out the old year, I picked it up from the late Neil Bartle, who had resurrected it from the not too distant past. He, in turn, had picked it up from his grandfather, A.S. Bartle, who imported it from his homeland. When the city's Lutheran minister at the time wouldn't allow it at his church, since it seemed, well, pagan to him, A.S. turned to Bjorn Peterson, the first minister of this congregation. And this city's first Gamlerskvöld was held in the yard of our first building just 6 days after it had been dedicated in 1892. The congregation gathered for a short service indoors before spilling out into the yard, where A.S. Bartle had kindled a small bonfire. There they sang songs while some congregants tossed scraps of paper and small objects onto the fire, giving it fuel, representing those things they wished to burn away from the year past. The custom evolved over time, partly because of city fire restrictions and some ancient Jim Gardner. And by the time the last one was held in 1971, only a few elderly members of the congregation attended, and they were greeted with a small torch held by Bardol's son, Neil Sr. By then, the final event was to a real bonfire, what the communion is to the Last Supper, a purely symbolic ritual. I was there, and the memory is burned into my mind. It was a grand day, literally, with the elderly. And yet I remember it, perhaps because I love fires. A quarter of a century passed before Neil Bardol revived the tradition at his country home, complete with a full bonfire, and I picked it up from him, albeit with a backyard fire in a city-approved container. Over the years that I hosted Burning Out the Old Year, family and friends burned mortgages, divorce decrees, court judgments, and estate documents. Well, at least the facsimile of those things, in my case, along with photographs, handwritten notes, and a variety of other objects, symbolically burning away their disappointments, their hurts, and sometimes even tokens of what had brought them joy. After my mother died, I tossed a copy of the Order of Service onto the flames. Well, 8 years ago, I incinerated a selection of pamphlets from my abortive and embarrassing campaign for Parliament, watching the former leader of my party burn away at midnight. None of these small ritual offerings burned away all the emotions that people felt, but they proved to be powerful acts of letting go. Not necessarily a final act, but a ritual marker along the way. It's hard to move forward if you're mired in your own past. This is as true for communities as it is for individuals. The more people focus on old conflicts and grievances and disappointments, real or imagined, the more likely it is that their efforts will be retrospective rather than progressive. At the beginning of a new year, it is natural to look ahead towards the promise that awaits us. But that promise will only ever be realized if we learn to let go of the things that hold us back. I recently heard someone say that before New Year's Day can mark the beginning of a new year, we must allow it to mark the end of an old one. Letting go is the first step to embracing the new. And it involves learning to recognize which tables are ours and which are not, as Meg Barnhouse suggests. Letting go is an act of resilience, and it may be followed by forgiveness of both others and ourselves, and even the beginning of true reconciliation. We need to stop investing every old hurt and disappointment with new power, especially in this age of chronic complaint. We need to stop refueling the things that hold us back. We can better use them to fuel the attitudes and actions that will propel us forward. Most people, most of us, arrive on the cusp of adulthood filled with dreams. Some have countless dreams and aspirations, others a focused few. Even those who may be short on ideals and perhaps even devoid of principles have dreams. Although people who are genuinely free of ideals and principles are few and far between, thank goodness. As life unfolds, some of our dreams are disappointed, while others may be fulfilled. And along the way, new dreams and aspirations may come to us. What is true for individuals is also true for communities, cities, neighborhoods, political and social movements, and of course, churches are all incubators of dreams and visions for a better future. As with individuals, their dreams and visions undergo refinement and change. Some are discarded, while new ones are adopted. And inevitably, communities will sometimes be disappointed by what they are actually able to achieve. That's fine, because we don't live in a perfect universe. And the members of these communities will eventually disappoint one another, even as they strive to accomplish some noble purpose. Sometimes precisely because they are striving for something that's difficult to achieve, something beyond our capacities, but nevertheless worth pursuing. Something you may remember me referring to last month as an impossible possibility. In his book, Overcoming Life's Disappointments, the late Rabbi Harold S. Kushner reflected on the life of Moses and what its overarching narrative might still have to teach. He believed that what we know, or think we know about Moses, had something to say to those of us who have struggled with disillusionment in the face of unrealized dreams, broken relationships, ill health, and a multitude of other challenges. After all, Moses is said to have led his people on a 40-year journey through the wilderness, listening to their bickering and complaints after little more than a month, only to be denied entry into the so-called promised land that awaited them. It's hard, but it's achievable. And it is necessary to our sanity, our safety, and our satisfaction to learn to let things go. What then was the wisdom of Moses that enabled him to carry on day after day, year after year, as leader of a people who exasperated more often than they appreciated him, asked Kushner. It was a recognition of the frailty of the human character, the occasional unreliability of even the best people, and the sometimes unexpected goodness of even the worst of them. It was his understanding that if he could not control the behavior or the emotions of others, he could control his response to them. In other words, he could let go and then move on. We're now 2 weeks into a new year as measured by the calendar. So my question to you is this: have you unpacked your own baggage from last year, or the year before, or perhaps the last decade, maybe even the better part of your entire life? How many trips around the sun will it take before you leave behind the garments that no longer fit, the accessories that have proven useless, the disappointments for which no compensation will ever be forthcoming? Not being a customs officer, I wouldn't presume to look through your trunk and know what you're carrying with you, let alone how you pack, what to keep, and what to discard. You need to figure that out for yourselves. I'm just asking the question because I ask it of myself at the start of every new year. And I ask it every summer. And I ask it every birthday I have, and I ask it every anniversary I celebrate, whether in January or March, June or September. 2 weeks after the fireworks and the festivities, it's still a new year. Our closing hymn is number 1054, Let This Be a House of Peace.